Resident Evil 4.
Hello there, Sir from 17 once again. This is my Resident Evil 4 professional no damage run. No damage professional run? I can't quite remember how I've been saying it, but it's that. And this is chapter 1-3, part 1. We're in, I think this is the Chief's house. I could be wrong. It's got a big picture of him on the wall, and he does turn up here if you go into that room, and he kind of throws you out the window. Which I don't recommend doing. It's a fun cutscene, but you know, sometimes you can do it by accident. Be careful of this room. There is one dude at the toilet, and it's funny how you can take down a full room, like a full arena of 20 zombies, and then one zombie will damage you. Like, you know, you never get to the point where you can't make those silly mistakes, which is something that I always find really funny when it comes to games. Like, later on, once you've really adapted to the controls and once you're pretty sharp, you're taking down rooms of 50 dudes. And then you remember earlier on that you're struggling with a room that had 3 guys in them. And that's what I love about the progression of skill in games. When you can look back on stuff you've done and you can see how much better you've got. Like, you know, when you start a new game after you've beaten it, and those first few rooms that beat you up, you're just showcasing, you know, supreme talent and awesomeness and just destroying everything, and it feels just easy because you've done this tougher sequence later on, and you've sharpened steel with steel and cut your teeth on the fights that were legitimately challenging. There are some games that don't have that, and I don't know if it's because they're harder or just because they function a little bit differently. One game that really shines for me is God Hand. Like, I just don't feel like I'm getting any better at that game. This is our first El Salvador, or as I like to call him, Chainsaw Guy. This is what I love about Resident Evil 4, as the sickle glides past my head, thankfully. The El Salvadors are some of the biggest, toughest dudes in the game, but you point blank them with a shotgun and it knocks them over. Do you know why it knocks them over? Because it's a goddamn shotgun, and that's what shotguns do. For some reason, this mechanic was broken in 5, and in 6, you know, every single gun you shoot people with, they laugh at you, because that's fun. I will never understand how they can make some of the most satisfying, you know, it's almost mathematical in its precision with how things work. And that to me is paramount game design. It's game design that is just so finessed and beautiful that even if you hate it, you have to respect it. But how can they go from having this system where it worked? I mean, the one thing in this game that bugs me a little bit is the finicky nature of the, you know, on-screen QuickTime commands. And what I mean by that, guys, is how many times have we stunned a zombie, gone in to do a kick, and it's vanished, the prompt. We've not done the kick, and then we've got punched by somebody because we were so close and we were going to use it as a crowd control. It's happened to us all. It happens maybe 1 in every 20 times. It's a small percentage of occurrences, but every time it does happen, you're reminded that compared to some of the other mechanics, that is one of the weaker ones. And it's just because that's the way that the system is integrated. And Onimusha, that I've been playing recently, has something very similar. There's a thrusting technique when the enemies are on the ground called a finisher, which, if you've seen any samurai movie, you've seen people do this. They take a sword to a downed opponent, they stab it in them, and there you go. It's a finishing move. You can do it in Ninja Gaiden, you can probably do it in any decent ninja game worth its salt. In this game, the detection on it is horrible. Absolutely horrible. Like, you have to be in a neutral state, you have to be, essentially you have to have your foot up their arse, you've got to be so close, and even then, if they're not in a neutral state on the ground sometimes, it'll just do a standard swing because the detection won't proc. And you just think, when an enemy's on the ground and I'm anywhere near them, why doesn't it just do the ground move? You know, it makes so much more sense if it just had a looser window that made it more reliable. And a good example for a contrast, if you're confusing what I mean, like God of War. God of War, if you don't know, is one of the most enjoyable action games ever made for a handful of reasons. It's over the top, it's got easy controls, it's got a block that blocks 99% of the entire game, so you've almost got no excuse to die if you know how to block. And it's responsive in ways that some games just aren't. And the throw on that game might as well just be called God Mode Engaged. And in the early games... Uh-oh. Did you see that? Goodness me. That was a close one, folks. And rather exciting, I do add. I should probably change my underwear after that moment. Because I thought I'd left in a mistake then, and I'd have to go and re-edit and stop the commentary. But it turns out I was just dicing with death, you know, in the shark's mouth right there. But you've seen this technique before. It's the good old door strategy and the groin slashing. But the grab on God of War, it is so unbelievably empowering. And it's completely fair, I think. Like, some people who are the more, you know, elitist in the God of War community, especially the people who compare God of War to Devil May Cry's and Ninja Gaiden's. Like, I used to be a member of a forum that is pretty much hardcore Devil May Cry. It had some people on there that had been playing it since the game came out. Like, they've been playing those games for 10 years, and you know, they love those games, and every other game pales in comparison because of those games that they love, which anybody can get like that, guys. But on those forums, if you mentioned God of War, they would laugh you out, because to them it was a joke game, a complete and utter joke game, which I didn't agree with, but I understand where they were coming from, because anyone who's played Devil May Cry knows there is no block, and in that game, if you do not avoid things, you die, and avoiding things is pretty tough, so you spend a lot of time dying until you learn how to do it. But the throwing God of War allowed you so much power, it afforded insane amounts of power, and it had a great range. Like, when you were just close enough to an enemy to be in striking range, you would throw them. And it worked beautifully. And they have changed it over the course of the games, they have changed it a little bit, but that was just perfect detection for what it was. You know, not every enemy could be thrown. Certain ones had to be damaged enough to get that special QuickTime prompt and stuff. Certain armoured ones couldn't be thrown if they had armour on. Santa Monica knew how powerful that throw was, which is why they put you in a room with a bunch of popcorn enemies that could be thrown, that gives you the iframes, and then there'd be something tough that can do a move that can hit a wide area. And they wanted you to use the throw to get that immunity, to get rid of all the silly enemies, and then you could focus on the big thing. And that was good game design to me. It was good enemy placement, because it gave you a situation which you could control and you could win. And I think that's great. And stuff like that, to me, separates good games from bad. And it's the simple details that are often overlooked. But the detection on that throw should have been the detection on Onimusha's finishing moves, and it should also have been the detection on the kicks on this. Like, I understand that QuickTime events, you know, weren't a big thing when this game came out. They were pretty much a new thing. Onimusha had done them, a couple of other games had done them, this was doing them, and they were this new way to achieve gameplay by doing things that just feasibly weren't possible to do when the player was in control. And they could have easily had it so that prompt never had to be on the screen. Like, whenever a zombie is in a non-neutral state of flinch or stun, regardless of where you are, when you were in the radius to hit them, it should have done that move. And that is one of the only holes in Resident Evil 4's game design for me personally. You know, I've mentioned that I'm not a fan of the shaky laser, which, you know why they've put it in. It's for realism mode, and it's also a mechanic to make some items later on valid, i.e. the stocks. You get the stock, it increases your ammo, your accuracy over distance, it makes the sway a little bit less worse. It's just, I'll never understand wanting realistic weapon sway in a game that is so far away from being realistic, it doesn't need it. To me, that just seems kind of strange. But once again, we're doing some shopping, and as I've mentioned, I will leave a few of these in, but I will start speeding them up in the future, because these videos are kind of long, because the chapters themselves are quite long too. A little bit of trivia, you can in fact kill the merchant, but he will not respawn at that flame for the rest of the game, so you want to do that sparingly if you can. Like, I don't know why anybody kills this dude, because I love him. He's so fun. But you'll notice, considering that we've been using the knife quite a lot, we've only been using the pistol to set up the, you know, the execution moves and what have you. We do have quite a lot of pistol ammo now. But the thing to bear in mind is never get too comfortable with your ammo count, because bosses on this game take massive amounts of damage. And like, you might not struggle at all when it comes to your ammunition during the levels, but I can guarantee you, if you get to a boss and you use all your ammo on him, the next few missions are going to be tricky just because of that very fact. And it's so easy to do, guys. Like the chief takes a pounding, the Gigante takes a pounding, you know, everything takes a pounding. It's probably the weakest area of the game as far as the damage parameters go. And this has been something in every Resident Evil, so it's difficult to really say, you know, it's bad or it's negligible, because it's always been the way they've handled them. And I understand it in some ways. For instance, Resident Evil 2, the final boss, Birkin, I think his name was William Birkin, he turned into this like lion thing, this dog, spiky, black and red, crazy monster, and he chased you around this room that had like 2 rows of machinery in it. And obviously back in those days there was fixed camera, tank controls, massive clipping, and a giant boss, and no life bars. So you were shooting this dude for weeks, and you didn't have many healing items, and you were pretty knackered, and Leon was holding himself because he was injured, and your little green vitality, fucking, what the hell's that thing called, like heart monitor was all in danger. And you were just like, please die, please die, please die, please die, please die. And you were praying, you were fervently praying that the next shot would be the last. And when that shot came, it was such a good feeling, because you had no idea how close to losing or winning you actually were. And on the one hand, I think that mechanic is great for that. On the other hand, it doesn't help the player at all. It gives you zero feedback. You have no real basis of if you're doing damage, if you're winning, and it's something that's stuck with this series. And if you think about it, guys, it didn't have to be the way they handled it. It didn't, because games had already had boss life bars for a very long time. Like, just look at Street Fighter 1. There was life bars on that, you know? Like, there's some old school games where you have life bars, and bosses had life bars, and it's something that had already been established. I mean, it weren't as prevalent as it is now, in some cases, but it was still a direction they could have chose, so it was intentional. And I'd love to talk to Shinji Mikami, or his translator. I'm not entirely sure how that would go. Just to, how did they get to that being the Capcom way of doing bosses? Because this is something that's translated into other games as well. Like, Devil May Cry was a Resident Evil game, and, you know, at some point of the development they realised that it wasn't really playing like Resident Evil, so they changed what it was. Onimusha is a Resident Evil game. It just, instead of having guns, you've got swords, and instead of it being set in, you know, like crazy zombified urban places in America, it's set in feudal Japan with crazy zombified rural Japan. And that game has the exact same Resident Evil boss syndrome of the bosses in it have got a lot of life. You can't tell what the life is. You can barely tell if you're doing much damage to them, and you are praying that the next slash is the one that kills them. And when that cutscene finally comes, it's a really good feeling. But when we look back at it now, because we're afforded so much feedback from almost every single situation, there's been something created that tells the player exactly what's happening, even if it isn't something he has to see. Maybe it's something he hears. Maybe it's something he feels via a rumble on the pad. You know, we have so much player feedback now informing us of everything, that when we come back to these older ways that it was handled, it is kind of crazy. The crossfade just then, guys, was me going back and looking at the graves, because there is a puzzle coming up, and I couldn't for the life of me remember how to do it. And I looked at the graves to see if they would give me, a better example of how to do it, and they just kinda didn't. So instead, I messed around pressing buttons until I got the puzzle, because I know exactly what I had to do, I just wasn't sure how to do it. I'm not much of a puzzle guy. Like, I don't mind them when they're kind of simple, but like old school... Ooh, did you see that then? I hope I did. Yeah, I did. Like, Resident Evil used to have some pretty great... Look at this. Someone on the first video couldn't understand why people didn't like the wobbly aiming. He thought it was a really good idea, and it made, the game better. In instances like that, can you really say you think the wobbly aiming is a good thing? Like, bullets are precious, man. And you're wasting them because Leon Kennedy's has got fucking cerebral palsy. It's bloody stupid. But, like, look, I'm just kind of pressing shit and hoping that I get the 3 I need. I know which ones you need, it's just getting them. Because you need to make the ones that were on the gravestones. But you can't press them directly, which is what makes it a little bit more challenging. But I suppose at least it's not as eclectic as some of the old puzzles. In the old Resident Evils, the puzzles were just baffling to a child's mind at that time. Like, even some adults, man, must have struggled with some of that shit, because it was like, how were you ever meant to know to do any of it? It was all just ridiculous. And not quite, broken... Oh, what's else? Is it Broken Sword? Or Monkey Island ridiculous? Adventure Game ridiculous? But it's still pretty ridiculous. But there is the 3 that you need, folks. I had a quick look to see what this treasure was. Turned out it was a green cat's eye. I tried to combine it with that, but it doesn't combine with that. It combines with the I think it's the cat statue that you get. Is it the gold links? And then you put it in that. But you have to save them for a very long time to be able to do that. And I am by no means the best manager when it comes to the treasures and stuff, so I just sell the shit. I'm not all that attached to making, the biggest amount of buck I can get from every tool and item. But here comes Moira in a filthy dress, so we can stab her in her fat tits. Go on, get down, woman. Which, I suppose if you think about it, compared to, like, most games, Resident Evil did have female zombies. There was some equal rights when it came to zombies, which is nice to see. Not quite too nice when it goes super extreme, the opposite way, like on Resident Evil 5 when you were in Africa, so you were killing black zombies because you were in Africa, and the only white people in Africa are the people who own all the mansions and all the oil and, those guys from Lethal Weapon. So they would have already been in fortresses away from the virus, so it would make sense that the black people would be zombies, because unfortunately epidemics like zombification will always get the weakest first, and a lot of the weak population in that country is predominantly black. So when you make a game where you're set in that country and the zombies are black, everybody gets offended. Like, how does this work? You're in Africa, for Christ's sake, it's Africa! What did you expect it to be? So, in the end, what did they go and do? There's now a random Saddam Hussein in there for the laugh. There's a random Chinese guy in there for a laugh. It's like, why have we done this Mickey Mouse bullshit just because a certain place has a certain, ethnicity of people? It's not like we're playing the game to hate black people. We're not all suddenly racist. It's Africa. So weird.